Alright, so in this walking stick series I'm going to briefly show how I cut this groove. And what this groove is for is it's used to attach my lanyard. Now I've got noisemakers on these lanyards. On my lanyards, I like to do that to keep from surprising both four-legged and two-legged creatures when I'm in the bush or doing what I'm doing, where human beings and four-legged creatures hang out. So I'm not surprising folks. But this is a way to keep the lanyard from sliding down. Sometimes you can take advantage of a natural crook or branch within your walking stick. That can work too if you don't want to carve into it, or if you can't for whatever reason. But I may just do kind of a different segment on certain carving techniques that would be good for bushcrafting. In the meantime, I'm sure there's other more experienced and knowledgeable bushcrafters that can do that. So I've already cut this, so I'm going to show you briefly the technique I use on this stick here, and to give you an idea. We're going to stay up. And so what I tend to do is you can take your cutting tool, and what I like to do is you kind of roll it. And what you're doing to do is you want to roll it so that you are creating a slit or a cut, and make sure that the end meets when you finish rolling it. And then sometimes if it's not deep enough, you can kind of make sure that it is deep enough. If you have serrated cutting tool or a stone tool, you can abrade this in, and all you're doing is just creating a track. Okay, I don't know if this will show up on camera, but there's a track that you're creating. And then what I want to do is I'm going to down from it, maybe 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch down, or however long, it doesn't really matter depending on what you're working on, what your intention is. You do the same thing. Just kind of want to roll it, and then hopefully you can meet where you started, right? If you do it carefully. I'm trying to do this real quick. I want the concept to come through versus any sort of like art form, right? So what ends up happening is you end up having these two tracks like this, right? So then all you're gonna do then is you're just gonna go from one groove, and maybe you can see that, and then you're just going to kind of carve or whittle up to the other groove. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. Do that. So what happens is you start to, as you can see, and this is the reason why I chose this piece of wood, because it's going to give me good contrast of what the groove that we're carving in, right? So it's really not that hard to do. You can just kind of, especially if you have a good cutting tool. If you have a stone tool, you can braid it in, and especially if it's a wedged shaped cutting tool, you can totally braid it in, and it will be the size that you need, and you don't need to refine it at all, because it'll work just fine, just the way that it is. But yeah, so then you can go back. So as you can see, we have it here, and you can go back the other way. Just be careful, right? To make sure you have a good clean edge and ledge, because the point is creating a ledge for your lanyard to catch onto, or whatever you're attaching on. Now this sort of whittling, notch making is very important, especially for making traps, and other tools, right? It does create a weak point depending on the diameter of your stick, so be mindful of that. Cutting into it, you create a weak point, but for the most part, this is really how you do it. Okay, real quick and dirty. If I was to attach a lanyard to this is how this would look, right? So that's all it is.